Right, good morning everybody, and welcome to the public board meeting of 16th of October, and particular welcome this morning to Paul Kirby, who's the Vice Chair of the Disability Equality Network. Paul, you've been here before, you're very welcome, and please feel free to speak at any time as you may wish. We have no apologies for absence. Are there any declarations of interest anybody needs to raise? Excellent. Then we move on to the minutes of our meeting of the 18th of September. Were they a true and accurate record of all that we discussed? Thank you very much. They are approved. On the action log, there is one item on transformation, which we're dealing with later in the agenda, and the other three items on the action log are not yet due. Is there anything arising anybody wants to raise? I have one matter arising, which is the independent review into the regulation of Walton Hall, the review that's being conducted by David Noble. It had been hoped that we would have that review at this meeting today. David has written a letter to me explaining why it will be the November board before he is able to come and deliver his report, and I will publish that letter on our website at the end of this meeting. Ian, is there anything you want to add in regard to that?
Thanks, Peter. I've seen the letter, and it makes a number of remarks, I think the detail of which we need to understand as part of the full report. However, I do welcome one of the recommendations that confirms that David did not find evidence of abuse during the 2015 inspection that was carried out at Walton Hall, and he also notes that the concerns that were raised about the hospital at the time were examined by the inspection team at the time. But as I say, I welcome understanding the detail of all of his recommendations and understanding how he arrived at his conclusions, and then looking forward to deciding how we act from that point forward. Thanks, Peter.
Good, thank you for that. That takes us on to your report and the executive team report.
Thanks, Peter. I'm going to begin by talking about the State of Care report. We laid our State of Care report with Parliament on Monday, and there was some follow-up work yesterday. I'd like to put on record my thanks to Chris Day and the engagement team for the hard work they did in publishing the report and organising the activities that sat around that. I'd also like to put on record my thanks to the teams that were involved in contributing to that, and all of the directors and their respective teams made contributions to the report in a range of different ways. The report is an important one for us. We do 75 inspections every day, and it is a bringing together of the information that we see in those inspections, plus information from a range of other sources, and bringing all of that together to give a real sense to the public of the state of care in this country today. So I'd like to thank colleagues for their support in delivering what I think is a successful report, and a report which seems to have really landed well with the public and the media. And I hope there's some important lessons that we'll be able to take forward in the coming months.
And can I add my own thanks to everybody that was involved in the report, but also to thank you and congratulate you, Ian, on your various appearances on television and radio and in the newspapers. I thought you came across really well, so well done and thank you.
That's much appreciated. Thank you, Peter. So in terms of moving on to the performance element of my report, I think what we've seen is small declines in the performance of the registration function during August, but we do know that there are a number of process improvement activities which are going on, and I'm hopeful that we'll see improvements in overall performance in that team shortly. The inspection directorates are working well in terms of timeliness of reports. I was particularly pleased to see that urgent enforcement action timelines are largely on target, and also safeguarding alerts are performing well. So those parts of our performance where speed is of the essence, we're doing well. In terms of report timeliness, I think it varied across the directorates, with August being a particularly difficult month because of annual leave in some places. In terms of budget, I think we're confident that we will break even at year end. We're currently forecasting a very small deficit, but I think I'm confident that by year end we will break even. And headline turnover and sickness numbers remain at the low end of our expectations. But as ever with sickness in particular, I think we would always like to bring that down. But I'm going to pause there, Peter, for any questions.
Right. Well, good pause, but no questions. So,
I have a question not related to performance figures, but within the context of the Chief Exec's report. But you can take that when you wish.
Do you want to take it now?
I'll take it now.
It's completely unrelated. I was wondering what efforts there are to encourage our frontline inspectors to have flu jabs, particularly this year. My colleagues, friends in Australia have had a really bad Australian winter, and it doesn't always follow that we have bad ones here, but there's a higher probability, and given the context in which many people go into organisations and premises, I just think it'd be good if we could encourage as many people as possible to do that.
We absolutely are. As you may know, flu jabs are offered free to all CQC colleagues, and that's done through Boots the chemist. I've had mine, and I've encouraged through things like blogs and other campaigns on the internet and so forth for colleagues to have their flu jabs, and we'll continue to encourage people to do that for all of the reasons that you outlined.
Good. Okay. Ian, where do we go next?
Kate.
To Kate. Kate.
Okay, so just want to talk to the board about an up-and-coming publication we are going to be releasing in November about sexual safety, with a particular focus on sexual safety in care homes. There's been some history to this piece of work. So back in 2018, we looked at sexual safety on mental health wards. Earlier this year, we released a publication about supporting adults with social care needs around their sexuality and relationships. And for this piece of work, we've worked very closely with a couple of families who have had very poor experiences of relatives or loved ones where they have had issues around this area. They have helped us to develop this report, so it's been co-produced from start to finish with families who have been involved. It's specifically looked at slightly over 600 notifications that we've received over a period of time where sexual safety has been flagged as the issue, and it's going to be making some recommendations to the sector about what we need to do differently in this area. So in it will be some quite tough case studies for us to read, as well as some examples of best practice where providers are doing a really good job at supporting people in this area. We're also going to be releasing a very short video to bring to life the story and the situation we are looking to highlight. So that will be coming out in November time.
Thanks, Kate. Any questions, comments? No? Right, so on to you then, Ted.
Thank you. My report starts off just highlighting the latest work that we've been doing in regulating closed environments following the Panorama programme Walton Hall. Colleagues will remember from yesterday's report that we have put 14 of these hospitals into special measures over the last year, 6 of them since that programme. And since the programme, it has been really very good that we've had more people raising concerns with us, and I would like to encourage people out there who do have concerns about these services to raise them with us so we can take action on them, as we are doing, demonstrated by the action we've taken over the last few months. Recently we wrote to 130 providers of care in closed environments to emphasise the importance of considering the human rights of the people they're looking after, and the importance of everyone engaged in these services and everyone involved in visiting these services, including, of course, the CQC, to take into account any concerns about abuse of human rights in these environments. And I think it's a very important part of what we do to stress that aspect of care is really very important. We'll shortly be publishing some guidelines on our approach to inspecting and regulating closed environments, and they will be put in the public domain because I hope they'll be useful to everyone involved in overseeing these services. But we see them as very much interim guidelines. We want to work with people in the sector and people who use these services to improve the guidelines. And of course, we will be looking for more advice and recommendations coming out of the independent reviews to help us make sure the guidelines are as good as they can be. I'm highlighting two publications that are coming out shortly. They're both statistical publications, so we can't preempt the results today, but I think they're really very important because they give us information. They're large surveys that give us really very useful information about people's perception of the care they receive. One of them is on urgent and emergency care, and that will be coming out shortly, and that's going to be very important to understand what patients' perception of the quality of care they receive from a service that we highlighted yesterday was under enormous pressure. And also later on we'll be publishing the survey about children and young people's experience of inpatient care, and this focuses very much on the children's experience wherever possible, particularly for the older children. And it is always interesting to compare their experience of care with what, if you like, the services feel they're providing. And it is a real challenge to those services. For both of those surveys, when the information comes out, I will write individually to providers who are whose survey results suggest that the experience of patients in their care is less good than average. And so we will be tackling that and be asking our relationship owners to take that forward with them to make sure that people are using this survey to drive forward improvements in care. And just finally to highlight, today we've published a report on the Royal Papworth Hospital. It is the first report on an NHS trust where the trust has come out outstanding for all 5 key questions. And I think this is many congratulations to Royal Papworth, their staff and their leadership. It is a great achievement for them. But it does reflect an overarching pattern of improvement we're seeing in many NHS trusts. And that was in yesterday's State of Care report, but of course it didn't feature very prominently in lots of the stories about it. And I think it is important we do pay tribute to the really good work that is going on in many trusts to drive up improvements in care. And I think it is very much a reflection of the successful leadership we've seen in those trusts that have been able to turn themselves around.
So, Ted, I absolutely echo that last point. It's a huge tribute to people in the services that quality has not just been maintained but often improved. And Papworth is a really good example of that. But there are many others as well. So it's really good. Just on the closed environments that been put into special measures. Do you have any sense of the engagement that's taking place to try and help these places to improve?
I suppose it's important to note that while these are NHS patients in these services, they are predominantly run by independent healthcare. And I think we are working very closely with NHS Improvement to establish ways that those services can be supported to improve, because NHS trusts, as put into special measures, get a large package of support, and that has proved very successful. The number of trusts in special measures has decreased markedly over the last few years, and I think this has been a very successful programme. And we are looking to work with our partners in NHS Improvement to develop a similar approach, albeit for these independent health providers, because it is an important part of the system that capacity is there. So I think we need to be very careful that we don't just see this as an opportunity, if you like, to take that capacity out of the system. We've said in the report yesterday that the model of care that they represent is one that we are not happy with, and we are looking for that to change. But in the meantime, we do need to make sure that patients can be looked after.
Good, thank you. Does anybody want to raise anything for Ted? Oh, Rosie then. Thank you.
Thank you. I just wanted to raise two pieces of work around online services that we've published this month. So as the board is aware, we have seen a significant growth in the use of online services, and the first publication is a joint statement with our regulators that we are working very closely with. So we work very closely with people like the GMC, the General Pharmaceutical Council, to look at how we can tackle some of the risks associated with online services. So the first publication was a joint statement from the cross-regulatory group. The second piece of work was an update on the choosing an online healthcare service that had previously been published, and this is really aimed to helping people, support people in choosing an online service when they need to access them, and make sure that they're accessing safe care through those services.
Good, thank you. Kirsty, then the fee scheme.
So actually, Chris is going to take this one.
Perfect. Chris, the fee scheme.
I'll take that one. So fees, we're now at full cost recovery, which means all of activity or regulatory activity is recovered through provider fees. Over the journey to get to full cost recovery, we've amended our fee scheme every year, and we've consulted on changes to those fees, the fee scheme. For 2021, we've agreed that the fee scheme will not change, and therefore no consultation is required on that. By doing this, we're hoping keeping the fee scheme unchanged will provide budgetary stability for providers, and also allows us the time to look at a longer-term strategy around our fees to come back with it at a later date.
Good, thank you. Malta, I checked just before we came on to the start of the meeting. We are still in the EU at the moment, so do you want to say anything about preparing to exit?
Thank you very much, Peter. So we'll obviously learn more today as negotiations are ongoing. So the two important messages from our perspective about preparations for EU exit are, first of all, that as an organisation, CQC is in a good place in terms of readiness for our own people, our own processes, contracts, and data, and has confirmed that with the Department of Health as such. Secondly, again, to iterate that if it comes to a no-deal exit and there are potential risks to people using services, our role as a regulator and our purpose remains foremost of all to ensure that people receive safe care, and that's going to continue to be our primary purpose. So we will continue to register, to monitor, to inspect, and where necessary enforce against services as we do now. We will, of course, if there is particular pressures on individual providers, be able to take account of that on a case-by-case basis in the same way we already do today, where there are significant events around particular services, like during winter, for example, particular pressures. We very much expect that to be the exception rather than the rule, but we have that flexibility where it is required. And, of course, where there are significant issues arising across the health and social care sectors, we'll be working very closely with all our partners to ensure that people receive care, safe care, and that improvement is taking place. So, thank you.
Good. Anything that anybody wants to raise on any of the ET report? Okay, so we can move on. I was always told that it was very dangerous, very unwise for actors to perform with children and animals. I was also always told it was very unwise to try and do a live technology demonstration in a meeting. So I think very courageous of you to do this. Gemma and Owen, you're very welcome. Malta, do you want to say anything by way of introduction? Chris? Okay, Chris.
Just to help the colleagues that have helped to move out the way. The giving feedback on care drives everything that we know about health and care, and having a service that works well for people to use it is vital in our work. This year's State of Care is an example of how we've used the voice of people to drive our understanding. So colleagues from across CQC have been involved in the redevelopment of this important service, and the video that they're going to introduce will just shows how the new service will operate. We hope this will both improve the quality and the quantity of the information that we receive, and will strengthen our public voice when we talk about what we know and what we hear. So hopefully I've given enough time for them to have the video ready, and you can hear it now. Over to you.
Carry on, Robert.
Okay. The good news is on the website there'll be a seamless view of this now, so all of this will be edited out.
So in which case you didn't need the microphone to say that.
Give feedback on care. Hi, I'm Gemma. I'm the product manager on Give Feedback on Care. Give Feedback on Care is a project which started actually in about 2016, and it's a new way for members of the public to give feedback online to CQC about their experience of care. So if they go to a hospital or a GP and they want to tell CQC about something which happened, it replaces the existing Share Your Experience form, which we have on the CQC website at the moment. So when this work started in 2016, we found that the Share Your Experience form wasn't really fit for purpose. We only had about 10% of people that started it actually completing it. And members of the public and whistleblowers were having real issues with things like finding their service and also using it on a mobile because it wasn't responsive, so it just shrunk and it was very small. So this is the first agile software development, I guess, project which has happened in CQC, and that means that we're being assessed against the Government Digital Service Standard. So that's an 18-point standard which looks at the quality of our design and the way that we've built the service to make sure that it meets our users' needs.
I'm Pip Light, a senior user researcher on Give Feedback on Care. My role is to help the team understand our users so we can design and build something to meet their needs. This involves conducting research with all users, both internal to CQC and external members of the public. I use different research methods to understand our users, including getting members of the public to test prototypes, whilst I observe and ask questions, and interviewing inspectors to understand their processes and pain points. We've conducted research with over 90 users based all over the country, and with differing experiences and digital skill levels. Conducting research with users with low digital skills, as well as those comfortable online, ensures that we build something that works for everybody and lets everyone complete their goal, telling CQC about their experience of care. I'm continuing research throughout our public beta, and as our numbers increase, we are conducting ongoing internal research with inspectors to understand if the new style submissions are meeting their needs. One area we're looking into at the moment is anonymity and how to ensure that users are making an informed decision about the choice to give their contact details or not. We're also continuing our research with users who have accessibility needs to ensure our service continues to work on all assistive technology and to ensure that all users are able to give their feedback on care.
So my name is Chris Gallant. I'm the content designer on this project, and I've been involved in interaction design as well. So interaction design is to do with the flow of the service, the way that the pages slot together, and the structure of the pages. Although we're using the GDS, the GovUK design system, which means we're using standard elements, the way those elements fit together depends very much on the way our users are using the service and what comes out of our user research and our analytics. One area that where we've taken the service through quite a number of iterations, and it's involved quite close collaboration between me and the user researcher and the performance analyst, is the way that we serve guidance information to people as they fill in the form, because we need that guidance information to be as concise and as specific to their feedback as possible. One good example of that is on the page where they give their feedback about the service. To start with, we had quite generic guidance text on that page, and we really just let the user say whatever they wanted in that feedback box. But as we went into private beta, we started to find out from user research with inspectors that they weren't really getting the specifics that they needed from that feedback. And often people included quite a lot of superfluous information that wasn't helpful to inspectors. So we started to experiment with more tailored guidance text to try to draw out the things that inspectors really need.
I'm Mark McDowell, and I work on the Give Feedback on Care project. So my main role in this project is performance analysis, which means I monitor and report on how the service is performing, so we can identify what is working well, and more importantly, what areas we need to focus on to improve how the service works for our users. So to analyse the performance of the GFC service, we have utilised tools such as Google Analytics, Optimize, Tag Manager, Hotjar and CRM. The main things we monitor are completion rate, page exit rates, mobile device use, and provider search performance. So far, the GFC service has achieved a completion rate of around 43%, with a total of 3,600 submissions to date. This is approximately a 30% improvement in completion rate over the old Share Your Experience service. We've also observed that the majority of GFC users and submissions are from mobile device users, which again is an improvement over the old SYE service that was difficult for mobile users to complete. So our plans for the future, as we move towards our public beta launch, we plan to add more GFC specific reporting in CRM, and that's through the assistance of our colleagues in NCSC Performance. We also have created automated dashboards that link to our service analytics, which we will continue to develop and add further metrics to. We also plan to utilise Google Tag Manager more effectively to add further depth to our reporting, so that we can improve on the way we monitor things like the effects of search improvements, error messages, link clicks to documents throughout our website, and the time users spend on pages of the service.
So what we're up to now is that we're just getting ready to be able to launch the service. So we've already got over 50% of the users that are using the existing Share Your Experience form using the new Give Feedback on Care form. So actually, it's not going to be a big, heavy launch. It's going to be quite soft and gradual. And what we're doing at the moment is tweaking some of the links and references to Share Your Experience on the CQC website. And then we plan to launch and release it so that everybody sees the new Give Feedback on Care service in November.
Okay, that's an overview of the development. I think probably things to note in that are there's a heavy reliance, to sort of John's earlier point, there's a heavy reliance on the conversation we have both internally and externally with colleagues to make this service work. In addition to that, there's a real sense of starting, trialling and developing over time. So the service that we'll have in 4 weeks' time will improve again. And I think that there isn't there isn't a sense of we have to have a perfect service as we launch. As I say, we've already launched a soft element of the service now. We want to continue to focus on how we can make the interactions even better. And we will, at the point where we feel assured, and we've made the changes to the website, we will obviously begin to talk about this more with our partners, particularly our public partners who've been with us on this journey. We've got share experience partners from across all the sectors that we regulate. So I want to pay tribute to the team that have worked on this, and the other people are not in the room but have been involved in the work all the way through. I'm very happy to take any questions or comments.
I was going to just add my thanks to the team that have worked on this piece of work. It's a really impressive piece of work. I think we slightly skated over the fact that it's been approved by Government Digital Service. I think it was more than approved. They described it as an exemplary piece of work. So I think given that Government Digital Service review all of these services right across government, the fact that they were so complimentary about this service just gives you some sense of how good it is. I think the second thing to say is that what this programme represents is a pattern of how we will do our business from this point forward. So you saw lots of reference to agility, lots of reference to trying new things, reference to involving users, whether that's internal and external users, to make sure that the service, and we're deliberately calling it a service, not a piece of technology, delivers for both external users and for internal users. And I think that the big figure that was really important is the old system, only 10% of people actually got to the end of completion. The new system is 43% now, and I think speaking to the team privately, they're confident that as this starts to roll out, that number will get bigger. And I think the accessibility around mobile devices in particular has been a really big surprise, and just demonstrates the way people are living their lives. So I think lots of good work here for this service, but I think we also need to recognise that this is how we will do business from this point forward. So well done.
Thank you, Kate.
So I wanted to echo Ian's congratulations on a product that we hope will encourage more and more people to talk to us, and we'll see through their feedback to completion. I know in this year's State of Care we were able to use a lot more of the intelligence that we've received to reflect back to the country about how people are experiencing health and care. Are you able to say a bit more about how we will provide that feedback loop under this new option?
So it's one of the. So we're obviously working on public beta plans at the moment. So we'll launch to everyone. So from next month, it will become the default for everyone, and that's one of the main things on our backlog. So there is some limitations on that because of the CRM work that's going on. So in order to close the feedback loop, in an ideal world, you'd have the way we manage our contacts and the way that we receive the feedback working seamlessly together, so that you can update people whenever we take actions within our CRM. Obviously, we've got another big transformation project going on around the use of that CRM, so we're having to work within the constraints of what we have there. But yeah, that's absolutely one of the main further development things on our agenda, is to understand users' needs about finding out what we've done as a result and telling them and how they want to be told and that sort of thing. That's all big elements of our roadmap.
I think the form will give us the ability to do that, and as we develop the CRM solution, we'll be able to link into that. I think it's also useful that we'll be able to. My ambition is that we're able to sort of make some of the information public as well, so people can see the information alongside our inspection reports, and I think that will be a really good indication that we've understood and are using that information in our work. And as we move to look at regional reporting around state of care, we can think about how we use that information in that context as well.
Sorry, is to we set out with users how we'll use their information, so giving really clear information to people how we're going to be using it, what different things it's going to be used for, and also telling them that we do give them a reference number, but also trying to make it really clear with users that this is not a complaint service. You're not necessarily going to hear back from somebody. And I think that that's something which has come out really strongly from speaking with inspectors as well, is that we can't contact everybody back. So it's actually about people understanding the bigger picture of how it informs CQC to be able to be more intelligence driven, rather than necessarily that they're going to get a follow-up from one person who's going to take that particular case.
So I think for me it's about that clarity of expectation up front about what we will do with that information, and just that continuous reiteration that every time people take the effort to give us feedback, that feedback is used and is useful, even if you don't get a bespoke response to what we did with your particular contribution.
I think that's really important, that they can see it being used to drive improvements in the way care operates. I think that's key.
So Jora, and then did you want to come in, Walter? No. So Jora and then Liz.
Yeah, I mean, great approach. I really like it. I like this lean way of working, using test and learn with data and analytics to help pivot. I like that you've set out your objectives early in terms of completion rates, etc. I sort of had two questions. One was following on from Kate's. So there's going to be a lot of quantitative analytics through your Google stuff, but the qualitative side of things where people can free-form add, I want to know how that was working. And I think in the video it was mentioned, but it wasn't quite clarified, the non-digital savvy users, how they would actually use sort of, not the product, but how would they go about sort of using the sort of way of a feedback loop back to the CQC?
Sure. So I think there's two. So on the first part, so the two parts were how non-accessible. So people not digital savvy. So part of we talked about, Ian mentioned about seeing it as a service rather than a piece of technology. And so we are working really closely with our concerns team in NCSC in Newcastle to look at online and offline. So not treating it in the past, we might have thought about it as the share experience form on the website, and then how we answer calls, and they might have completely different projects or different approaches, whereas now we're seeing it all as one kind of service together, working very closely with people that are answering calls, answering emails, and also people that are triaging stuff that comes through our service, so that people are getting a kind of unified customer experience, if you like, no matter how they're sharing that information with us. And the first point was, sorry.
It was around qualitative feedback.
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about quantitative feedback.
So Chris touched on it a tiny bit in the video, but what we've done is we've already started pulling from having a single text box to actually having more text boxes asking more specific questions to try and get more structured data. And we've also got a lot of user research going on with inspectors to understand how the information that's coming in is meeting their needs. So there's kind of a tightrope to be walked between we know a lot of the public users of the service want to tell us their story, and so you don't want to kind of block them from doing that. We see a lot of people leave the service where they think it's not actually what they want to do, but at the same time we need to make sure we get the structured data we need, so answering the particular questions. So we're definitely finding the line between those two things. At the moment, it's mainly around having more qualitative feedback rather than just a single story box. We've got a story box and then particular questions: where did it happen, when did it happen, these kinds of things where we can get more specifics that's more useful to inspectors, and subsequently making those slightly tailored to the sectors, as Chris touched on. So asking a different question for GP than we would for hospital.
Kind of adding to that as well, there's also like ongoing work with our colleagues in intelligence who are doing like severity analysis, sentiment analysis, so looking at patterns in what people are saying and then being able to draw out stuff from it. So I think that's quite like that. There's a lot of potential with that as well, and they need lots of data to be able to really get that stuff, which is why it's better that we're getting more people through than we were previously.
And the other side of that feedback is the feedback we're getting from our share experience partners, so how they and their, because we've a while ago we did some training for organisations that provide some of the information back to us, so that if you go to an Age UK helpline, you'll get our information and they'll help you to complete that form, and therefore we can go to them and use them as for feedback from the public about how the service is working for them, and that'll be an important part of how we develop it moving forward.
Good. So Liz, then Robert, then Ted.
Thanks. Yes, you just partly answered my question, really. I was wondering to what extent the themes that are coming through, if we're analysing those, are feeding into things like future strategy, future independent voice work, whether we as the board might from time to time see what are some of the key themes that are coming out, and also how that's fed back. So I'm very supportive of the idea that as much as we can to say you said we did will make people feel it's worthwhile and reduce any frustration people might feel. But that doesn't have to be about what's done about their individual thing about this particular part of the country. It could be about that's led us to do some piece of work on this topic because it's come up again and again or whatever.
Certainly the themes. I mean, this year's State of Care focus on access was in part driven by that feedback that we'd had from people who've used services across the country, and certainly going forward, our independent voice work is very much based upon what we know from our inspections and our intelligence, what we know from the conversations we have with the public, and what we know from providers and other stakeholders, and bringing those together into cogent themes of work is very much part of how we intend to take this forward.
Presumably also linking up with Healthwatch, do we? Because Healthwatch produces a lot of material about what the public has been saying, thematically described.
So we share information two-way with Healthwatch. They've been really. I mean, this year's State of Care is a good example of it. Their information has contributed to the themes of State of Care, and certainly we recognise that giving feedback on care is only one element of that. And we have, alongside Healthwatch, we have relationships with a number of organisations that represent different communities, and we want to bring all of that to bear when we talk about our independent voice themes.
So, Robert, that's a pretty good segue to you, sir.
Thank you. And I wasn't going to ask about Healthwatch. Thank you very much for the presentation and the really encouraging stuff. The question I had was that if I, as a contributor, I'm giving my feedback about a specific place and a specific incident, do I have any promise that will actually be seen by the local inspector?
So at the moment, every single piece of feedback that a user gives will be seen by an inspector. That's the way that the current process works. There are questions about whether or not that should happen. But at the moment, that is what happens. But we've been trying to... Previously, inspectors were telling us that they weren't getting the information that they needed. So you would say something, but you weren't really, the share your experience form wasn't really driving the information that we really needed. So where something happened, when it happened, who you've already told about it, etc. And so inspectors were having to do a lot of follow-up, and so were NCSC sometimes as well. So there was a lot more work around it. Whereas now, an inspector, hopefully, in an ideal world, which I think is happening, there's better quality information coming through so that you're having to do kind of less follow-up on it, and you can say, actually, that's a really useful piece of information, but I'm not going to do anything with it. You just add it to your kind of inspection planning.
Is there any process of triage that goes into this before?
Yeah, so it goes... Yeah, so somebody will give their feedback, and then the submission is integrated with the CRM, and then it will go to a pre-inquiry queue for NCSC, and then it gets assigned to somebody in NCSC in the concerns team. They will then triage it based on, how severe it is. If it's positive feedback, negative feedback, they do something different with it. And then they pass it over to an inspector. For NCSC, that's already reducing their triage time by about 5 minutes, and they love it. So then it goes, to the inspector after that.
Ted.
Congratulations on this piece of work. I think it's really very exciting. And you've been talking a bit about improving the qualitative information coming back, and that sounds really good. But also the completion rate, the increase in completion rate is really impressive. So that presumably we're going to get a lot more of this feedback coming back to us. And I suppose, just building on what you were just saying a few moments ago, do we understand how this is going to influence our regulatory and inspection activity on the ground? And have we got a way of monitoring how it does influence our regulatory and inspection activity? Because if this, there's a kind of real sense of here, this has a power to change some of our priorities in what we're going to do next, and where we're going to inspect, and what action we're going to take. And it'd be nice if we kind of could see that happening, rather than just organically waiting it to happen and reacting to it.
Yeah, this is actually something I was talking to Rosie about, how we kind of also need to think about some of the stuff around what inspectors are doing with the information as well, because our research with inspectors has kind of shown that there's not there's not like standardisation among the inspectors about what they do with feedback that comes from Give Feedback on Care or via the phone. You know, that they all do different kind of things with it. And so I think that there's definitely potential for us to think about kind of the information that we're giving to inspectors about how they should be dealing with this information, trying to standardise that a bit more so then it will help us be able to have the information have more impact and be more effective.
I think, just to build on that, there's a piece about beyond independent voice that we've spoken about. If we know there are themes emerging on particular topics, whether we need to build on our understanding, so either our guidance to providers and or our guidance to colleagues, so that we can address any issues that are emerging in any particular sectors or indeed cross sectors.
Good. Absolutely, and I think the idea about influencing themes or independent voice and how we take it forward, but equally this may build up to more information about individual providers, and we say we're going to bring that inspection forward, etc. And in fact, I hope it would, because I mean it gives us kind of much more dynamic information about people's perception of their care. But will we know if that's happening? And are we prepared, and do we have a dynamic enough approach to actually take account of it?
So we've got a dashboard as well. So we've got a way of analysing in sort of CRM. So we've got the actions that there's a form that the inspectors fill out that says up to they can put 1 or 2 actions they've taken as a result. So at the moment we track, over the quarter for share experience, how many responsive inspections, how many times did we go out and actively, as a direct result of that submission, how many times did we go and do an immediate inspection? So yeah, we could look at those numbers, and that will be a really, it's not perfect, but it's a really strong model of what's changing as a result. Are we doing more more responsive inspections? Are we having more RMs? Are we having more any of those actions that an inspector might log as a direct result of that submission?
Good. Last word to Jora.
I think what it sort of highlights, just sort of Ted's sort of question sort of triggered something, that we shouldn't treat each of our products as isolated islands. They're sort of connected, and they're connected through a service. And I think it's going to really bring in, inspection is one way of getting information, and this is another way of bringing in information, and almost like, potentially more of a real-time way of sort of maybe alerting to the system. Going, there's something that should aid a service now where we really need the inspectorates to trigger an action. So in a way, this is a call to action to do something, or potentially a call to action to do something. So maybe it's a way for how we look at service delivery across the CQC, which probably would fall in Kirsty's space, but it would be interesting just to see how we look at sort of these different products and how we build a service wrapper across the products.
Go on, Kirsty.
Thank you. Yes, so what I was going to say is this is just one part of a very complex set of programmes which will enable us to do just that. So we're pulling in the data. There's a huge programme around all our analytics which will help inform how we do our regulation and inspection in the future. So absolutely, I think it will get there, but this is just the first step in that process.
Good. So thank you very much for answering the questions, so many questions. Thank you very much for the great video. The only thing that was missing was the popcorn, which no doubt will be present next time. This is really, really exciting, and as others have said, a great step forward for us. So thank you very much indeed. Having said it's a great step forward, I'm going to take a step backwards because I didn't make it clear when I was saying were there any questions around the ET report that I, in my mind, was including the performance report, but I didn't make that clear. So, Mark, I know you wanted to raise something on the performance report.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I wondered if I could ask a question about Chart 18, the processes chart, decreased cost loss to IT issues. When I was up in the Newcastle office last week, I came across the tech bar innovation, and there was a huge amount of energy there, and I'm sure that is very much wrapped up in this approach to trying to reduce time lost. I just wondered, Mark, if you could give us some, a bit of an update about tech bar and whether there's any plans to roll it out, and indeed how we measure the effectiveness there, because as I said, there was a huge amount of energy and there was an engagement going on whilst I was there, and I was very impressed with it.
Great. Thank you very much, Mark. So I'm doubly delighted about this because kind of setting out the need for us to improve the service to our our customers, but my team has sort of spontaneously developed this initiative, and it was really a pilot to test to see if that sort of approach would work for our colleagues, and it's been a tremendous success. We've been able to do it in Newcastle very quickly because we've got a number of technology resources across the different variety of specialties that we need to be able to offer that in-person service. But what we'll take from that is the understanding that works very well. It provides a fantastic in-person service to our colleagues, and look to build a case to develop that wider. So that's not just for office-based colleagues, but where our remote working colleagues come together for conferences or department meetings or regional meetings. We'll have a roving version of that we can bring out to provide that level of support. And what we found is that sort of in-person treatment allows people to address any issues they might have very quickly in person, and often that there are issues that people have sort of been grumbling along with for a period of time that actually they're able to resolve, they surface those and resolve them there. In terms of metrics, we have the ability to measure the sort of speed and volume of those resolution against the remaining, the kind of the online stroke sort of service desk calls that we have, so we can see that, and obviously we measure the quality of feedback that we get in terms of that quality of service. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good, thanks. John.
For those of us who haven't had the benefit of seeing this, what is it?
That's a very good question. So it's essentially an in-person place where you can come and get any technology issues or support or training that you need in person.
So it's not where you go for a drink, John, sorry.
You can, no, not for a drink.
I resent the implication.
Is there anything else on the performance report, having not made it clear that I meant to have covered that? Right, in which case we move on. Mary, great welcome to Mary Cridge, coming to give us your annual report on the Speak Up Guardian work. So, Mary, over to you.
Well, thank you very much. I'm very pleased to be here presenting in Speak Up Month. In the report I presented, I've summarised the activity over the last year. I make a reference to the internal and external connections that work with us and support us. I've given you something of the numbers. I've pulled out some insights and some themes. Overall, it's been a busy year, and I have enjoyed support at all levels, but at times it has felt hard. I think that's because of competing pressures and demands, and I've given an example about the delay in some training. So there's been no lack of will to support, but the practicality of that hasn't always been as I'm sure we would have all have wished. Our themes and our challenges continue to mirror those of other organisations that we're aware of, and certainly those in the NHS, as reported by the National Guardian's Office. And we take account of her published findings from the case reviews that she undertakes, and from that I can see that there is a consistency of experience for those of us who are grappling with this. There's lots of good news too. I think we've got evidence of increasing awareness of the power of a positive speaking up culture and a determination to make it so. Ambassadors are increasingly active, both in terms of promoting positive speaking up and also increasingly used to support colleagues. The challenges, I think, are to continue to grow our confidence that something will be done, and also supporting colleagues to respond well when someone does speak up. Internally, our links are to all parts of the organisation and to our equality networks through the reference group, the staff forum and trade union side. And this year we have been engaged as a group, and the ambassadors too, with the development of the wellbeing strategy, and we are currently actively working on the inclusion strategy, which I think you'll be seeing next month. And absolutely delighted with the decision to train 30 ambassadors as mental health first aiders. So I think that their role and impact continues to grow. Externally, as well as the National Guardian's Office, we're part of an arm's length body, Guardian Network and a pan-sector network, and we remain part of the Ashridge-based cooperative inquiry group. We've been very pleased recently to, engaging with our new Director of People, and the invitation for the Speak Up lessons to be part of the review of HR policies that's underway. That's a very positive development. Our numbers, 24 to the end of March and 15 since, compared to 35 over the 12-month comparison period. Not a significant change, I don't think. Ambassadors are reporting an increase in activity. The only rather negative increase has been the number of people not willing to take things further. And that's a challenge to us to make those speaking up feeling really welcome. We have some insights through 3 surveys over the last year. I've reported before that the question around confidence in raising a concern around here, how safe is it, is a benchmark question in our annual survey. That's been stuck at 42% for the last 2 years. We had the Speak Up survey that Professor Rees ran for us, and which the board had presentations of earlier in the year, which told us that we're average. So all the challenges and barriers to speaking up are the same for us as anywhere else. But I can assure you that we act differently with our regulatory hats on. There's no lack of courage when it comes to inspectors following up concerns that are raised. We're just less brave when it comes to our own internal working environment, and that's not unusual. The Pulse survey tells us that awareness of how to raise a concern has increased. A very pleasing 87% overall aware of how to raise a concern. Work to do on the confidence in whether people feel they'll be listened to at 53% overall. But I think that's a really important increase in awareness, because without that we won't get further. The big theme I've pulled out is making zero tolerance a reality, both in terms of our policies and in our behaviour. And leaders at all levels have a part to play, not just in role modelling, not just in neglecting to send that terse email, but in not being bystanders. We know from the data that we get through the survey that many people report having witnessed bullying. And the work of organisations such as Civility Saves Lives are starting to pull out the impact, fortunately temporary, on our cognitive abilities when we not only are on the receiving end of less than stellar behaviour ourselves, but even if we witness it, it has an impact. Civility Saves Lives literally means, in the context of an A&E department, in our context it means temporary debilitation in terms of our effectiveness and performance. And obviously that's something we all want to avoid. So no quick fix to that. The key lesson is early, timely, good conversations where we give each other feedback, whether it's about an idea we've had or the fact we think that someone else's idea isn't going to fly, or it's behaviour we've seen. Nothing beats that early conversation. So our focus going forward for the next year is on equipping all colleagues in CQC with some tips and techniques to make that easy. If it was easy to do, it'd all be fixed by now. So lots going on in the coming year. I've mentioned the mental health first aiders, and later on this month we are, as part of Speak Up Month, we have a joint activity here on the 29th of October with colleagues from Black History Month that the National Guardian and I are speaking at, because as last year the themes from those 2 areas of focus absolutely come together. When we cut our Pulse survey results by looking at equality characteristics, those with a disability and those from the BME community have less confidence in speaking up, significantly so. So we absolutely have more work to do. But I feel confident going forward, confident that our heart's in the right place, and in our very busy agendas, just following through on some of the practical differences that we can make. Thank you.
Thanks, Mary. Both a great presentation, but also a great report. So thank you. Comments, questions from board, Rosie?
Thank you, Mary. I was just going to say I was fortunate enough to be a judge for the HSJ Freedom to Speak Up Organisation of the Year, and some of the themes that were coming through in the really high-performing organisations in this are absolutely, I think, what you're working towards with us internally, and those were about actually how do we look at people with diverse backgrounds, and how do we make sure they get the same feel comfortable as well to speak up. And I wondered if we're doing any work with our networks around that internally. And I think the second theme that came through very much on the judging day was about actually how do we make sure that freedom to speak up is not seen in isolation, but very much as part of the overall culture within the organisation and embedded in the organisational development of organisational development needs of the organisation. And so it's really great to see that Jill's very involved in this as well, in terms of the staff, the HR policies and the staff survey work.
Microphone.
Sorry. When it comes to networks, we haven't actually assessed how diverse our ambassador group are, and so we're going to do that. We think the more that we can reflect that in that group, that increases our chances. We are increasingly working together with the networks in the Speak Up reference group. We do work together on areas of priority and focus. It's that bit of that's what I mean when I say there's no lack of will to get this right and do it right. But what does that mean in terms of practical action? And I think it is about. It may be about partly training, but it is about making role models and just continuing with the communication. In terms of are we making it part of our wider sort of work, I was enormously delighted to be invited to deliver a Speak Up slot as part of our QI Gold training, with the recognition that a positive speaking up culture is essential for those organisations where quality improvement has flown. So I think there's that recognition. It gets sticky when the problems occur, and Henrietta Hughes, in one of her recent, National Guardian, one of her recent reports, refers to organisations unintentionally creating barriers. And one of those barriers is a sense that this issue isn't a speak-up issue, when in fact they're all speak-up issues. And helpfully, in a recent review of North West Ambulance, has listed the things that are definitely speak-up issues, which include employee experience, bullying and harassment, diversity, training, opportunities. So I think the more, I really think the HR policy review will be critical to embedding some of this, so that, once we're consistently following our new policies, I'm sure we'll be in a much stronger place.
Paul and then Malta.
Thank you. Mary, thank you for the report. It's a very good report. In it, you highlight the issues that involved whole teams have been particularly challenging to resolve. And I just wanted, I'm assuming that this is where the speak up is about the whole team rather than the whole team speaking up. But I just wanted to understand how prevalent the issues are about a whole team as opposed to about individuals.
I'm not sure that I have the data to say how prevalent it is. There have been. I wouldn't need two hands to count the number of those over the last year. There weren't any of that nature the year before. I think what it's presented to me is the challenge to stay the right side of the line as Guardian and the ambassadors, in that we must not become advocates. We support it. So being careful to try not to do that. But I do think when we come to work with HR on solutions, some of our current techniques, such as mediation, which has enormous value when applied at the right stage, is less helpful in a team scenario where things are of some long standing. So I think we need to be a bit more creative about what our offer is to help teams heal, if I could put it that way. Because I think for most of them there is potential to heal, but it takes some skill to get through that sometimes. But I think it's probably a question of us having a better offer in some of those situations.
Good. Malta. And then Kate and Ted and John.
Mary, thank you very much. As a Freedom Speak Up ambassador myself, I can only really emphasise and say thank you to all the great work that you're doing and fellow ambassadors. Having been involved in a couple of cases as well, I've seen how powerful it is to be able to talk to a colleague about how they can speak up better and have the right type of conversation. The question I want to ask you, Mary, is whether there's more that we can do as an executive team and as a board to talk about and showcase where people have been able to speak up, how they've been doing that, and the results that it has had. In the same way we talk about this when people come to us and raise concerns, we say we want to talk about that for others, to see it and encourage that, to do that, whether we can do that more with our own teams as well, whether it is by inviting some of the ambassadors and their experience, or whether even some people would be willing to talk about their personal experience after that. I think doing that and emphasising and encouraging others to come forward through the example of where it has worked well is possibly the best way that we can achieve that.
I think the ambassadors would be pleased to do that, and some I think would be prepared to share their stories. We've seen from our hospital inspections the power of patient stories when done in the right way in terms of setting the tone for discussion. And some trusts I've been in have had staff's stories at the start of relevant committees and so on. So I think if where it's not a token gesture, as I'm sure it wouldn't be here, and where people feel safe to do it, I would encourage the invitations.
Good. Kate.
I just wanted to say a kind of personal thank you to Mary. So as we start to think about transitioning the Guardian role on, and we're having a conversation at the moment about how we ensure the sustainability and visibility of this role, I just wanted to say a personal thank you for the kind of championing you've done, as well as the individual support you've given to people through the Speak Up route, and the kind of ongoing active challenge you provide to us as an exec team and the board, which I think we welcome. So thank you very much, Mary.
Ted?
Well, I'll certainly second that, Mary, and thank you for this report, which is full of really rich themes in it that I think we need to learn from. So can I just touch on a couple of those? I mean, one is, excuse me, you were talking about the difference between people's awareness of how to speak up and their confidence as it lead anywhere. And I mean, that is a striking difference, isn't it? And you said I think you're implying that that's fairly typical of what organisations find. I suppose closing that gap is absolutely the key to this, isn't it? It is giving people the means to speak up, but also the confidence to speak up. And I suppose the question is, what do we know from other organisations that have been able to close that gap? And has anyone ever effectively closed that gap? There must be learning there as well. And my second point is your themes are around, and this comes to what you were just talking about, I think, around interpersonal relationships with the manager, with the immediate team, sometimes described as bullying, but clearly difficult. And I suppose what's the lesson there about how do we get teams to actually look after their relationships better, so that they don't get into a position where someone feels they have to speak up, or they have no other way of dealing with it?
Big questions, Ted. Thank you. So in terms of closing the gap, I think where we've seen it happen really well in the organisations that we inspect is the theme for those organisations that have really improved is really the same, isn't it? It's the well-led domain. It's leadership at all levels. It's confidence of managers and colleagues that certain behaviour is welcome and celebrated, and others are not. I think some of the key lessons for leaders, remembering how scary we are. Even lovely people are scary. Position makes you scary, even if you're the most communicable person around. And not putting those barriers, the shut-up, unintentional shut-up barriers. I think one of our big challenges is how busy people are that if you were looking to speak to a certain person and looked in their diary, it can be very hard to find a slot. So I think some teams have challenged that by putting in not even an hour or two a month where a senior leader is available and anyone can dial in to speak to them or come and see them and so on. I think simple steps like that. And then there some cracking stories. If we could have a story where someone would feel that they'd really seen the end of their story come out really well, and we've got some potential for that because we've some outcomes have been to ask for particular policies to be reviewed. Where that policy is reviewed and someone's very happy, the original speaker-upper is happy about that, we could really promote that because I think people will gain confidence through that. In terms of interpersonal relationships, I think the Academy has some great offers for teams, and I would encourage people to consider their needs, insight into each other's behaviours, understanding how someone, the differences under stress, particularly in the context of so many people being home workers. Home working relationships have to be really good working relationships plus, because you have to take extra steps to create the same sort of environment and support that you would get if you saw your colleagues every day. So I think it's doable, but it's concentrating on it and valuing it. And I think our wellbeing strategy is another great support for that. The importance of connectedness will make a difference to wellbeing, and that will make a difference to performance and our impact. It's just a win-win-win.
Last question to John.
Mary, thank you, and I welcome your comments about your involvement with QI and that Speak Up is part of the development of a QI culture, and also I welcome your broadening of the definition of Speak Up, because I think as we progress with the transformation programme and the pressures that there are alongside that and the pace, it will be easy to villainise people who object or raise issues or whatever, when in fact the converse is true, that out of that challenge comes a strengthening of the decision making and a gathering of pace, and I think it would be important that that's perceived in the context in which you have placed it.
Go on, John. Robert. Sorry.
Well, firstly, I just want to say thank you for what you are doing and the report and everything else. It's absolutely what I would have envisaged when I first wrote the report on Freedom Speak Up. Two questions. One is in relation to the importance of civility, which is the way in which we behave to each other in normal life, and with all the stresses and strains that go with that, realising we need a bit of resilience with each other. But it's about the learning how to listen to people that I think sometimes is what starts to go wrong. And can be the minor signs, such as the bit of irritation there is when I've got something better to do and someone comes up with a complicated problem. And as a leader, I suspect you have to learn very quickly that you can't even do that, because any signs can be destructive. And I just wonder whether we have enough support in the system to remind people of that and how one does that. And the second thing is actually slightly more personal about you and your fellow ambassadors, whether you feel collectively or individually you have enough support in doing what can sometimes be an extraordinarily difficult job.
Thank you. On the civility point, I think this is our ambition to provide some further tools to all colleagues and particularly managers at the discourse around disagreement. There's an outbreak of discussion around this. There's a recent book, Rebel Thinking, which should be on everyone's Christmas list. I think valuing difference in views is really important, but doing it well. We have a phrase that Ian has used, disagreeing well. I think that's a skill, that's a life skill. And I think if we all did that a bit better, all sorts of areas of life and performance at work would be increased. But it is easy to say and hard to do consistently. And this is why I think teams working together to understand what makes each other tick, understand the stresses for individuals is a really important key to that. We need to understand what's normal for people, and understanding that when someone is particularly quiet, that might be a sign of stress in one person, where it's merely a sign of a good concentration in another. So it is really that simple and that difficult to address some of that. In terms of support, there have been times over the last year it's felt quite lonely. The ambassadors are a great support network in themselves. But I think in our discussions with HR around the future, and coincidentally NHSI and E, who came up with the original guidance on the policy, are reviewing that over the coming year. So it's likely we'll be updating our policy in line with national guidance. I think support for those doing this is important, because it can, one takes on the anguish of those one is supporting, and at times it does feel quite hard.
Great. So I was going to thank you for the report, but more particularly for the work you have done over the last period in actually really establishing Speak Up in CQC, Mary. You've done a fabulous job. Kate slightly preempted my saying that, but it was worth saying several times. Thank you very much for what you've done. I feel we're well on the journey now, and that's where we needed to be. So thank you very much indeed, and good luck in your fantastic new role with us, I hasten to add. Good. Good, thank you. So that moves us on to the people survey. Welcome to Jill and Kieran. Kirsty, do you want to say anything by way of introduction?
Just very briefly, while Jill gets herself in there. So we carried out a pulse survey in August. We have a main annual survey going live in November. This is just a bit of a snapshot, really, to take the temperature of the organisation. And I think it's a bit of a curate's egg, I think would be a good way of describing it, but I'll let Jill take you through the detail.
Hello everyone. I've met most of you last time I was here observing, so I'm delighted to be here this morning. Can I just offer at the beginning my appreciation to whoever put the agenda together, because there's a seamless pattern here around feedback and listening, which I think is really important for us to sort of just hold in the context of this discussion this morning and into the afternoon. So I think, as Kirsty said, this is an opportunity. It's the first one because we've not done a pulse survey before, so first opportunity to bring a sort of a pulse survey temperature check data set to the board. So that feels quite important to us. Pulse and people surveys are, I think it's important to say, a way in which the organisation has an opportunity to listen and therefore respond to our employees' voice. We've heard a little bit of that from Mary. It continues to be a conversation that I'm starting to have with our trade union side, but also with our networks. I'm very pleased that Paul's here today. And actually looking at the totality of employee voice, I think is a really important thing for us to do as an organisation. And it's one of the emerging themes that I'm bringing into what will be a development of a people plan for CQC. So, but back to why we're here this morning, and I will try to sort of not rehearse too much the data because you've had an opportunity to look at that already. I think what we have in terms of the data that we got, and bearing in mind that this temperature check pulse survey was really about testing a couple of key areas. So that was testing how communications are working and landing in the organisation, and also how we are leading change. And given the amount of change that we have going on and will continue to go on, they feel like pretty important issues for us just to do a little bit of a temperature check into. So you have a summary of the headlines from the data and the data pack at organisational level already. I think it's fair to say it's a mixed picture, and it would be disingenuous of me not to do that. But we have got some very positive headlines in there. So 77% of those who responded feel positive that they understand why the organisation is changing. That is a massively positive score, and we shouldn't underestimate that. other organisations going through change in just business as usual change would give their right arm for that level of understanding. So I think we should really bank that and reflect well on that in terms of what we are doing as an organisation, how our communications is helping people understand what's happening now and in the future. There's also some really positive stuff about sort of the IT improvements, the technology that we're bringing in, and how that is really helping people to do their jobs well and better. So they're really, really positive things that I think this survey tells us. There are some further points for focus, I think. It's disappointing, if I'm honest, to use that kind of language, that we've only got 34% of respondents who feel able to contribute their ideas to changes that are impacting on them. That tells me we've got some way to go in terms of being able to properly listen and provide opportunities for people to contribute. And that's not just through speaking up, but that is actually through an engagement and a connection with what is happening locally and organisationally. And I do wonder whether actually the work that we're just starting around QI, we should really see that as our ability to capitalise on that sort of to address that issue. So I'd like to see I'd like to think that will move quite quickly into something which is a much more positive foundation. There's clearly more for us to do on people feeling recognised for their contribution. And it will be interesting to see how that plays out in the wider survey next month. And that tells me that not only do we need to perhaps rethink about how we formally recognise sort of contributions and value people's achievements, but actually it goes to the heart of, as an organisation, are we properly saying thank you to people for the small things that happen on a day-to-day basis? So the micro behaviours around just saying, do you know what, that was a really, really good job, and how we make that an important part of the organisation and the culture and the ways of working strikes me as an opportunity to really sort of look at what sits behind some of this data. The question on ET providing clear direction and leadership, there's clearly more to do there. We have an executive team which is only just newly completed, so I think this is a work in progress. There was a discussion on the back of these emerging responses, and already we've seen a real commitment and shift in the behaviours of those around the ET table to really recognise that, take that to heart, and do something very practical about that. So there is a I think there is a movement, and we will continue to see, I hope, sort of further progression on that. And what sits behind that data in terms of the opportunity that we have to shift that is there are large groups of neutral scores there. So we haven't got a polarised position. We have some people are positive, some people still yet to be convinced, and I think we have an opportunity to convince those who are sitting on the neutral fence at the moment. And then I think there's finally sort of and continuing on the theme that Mary has raised around speaking up, there is still more for us to do to properly listen as an organisation to the issue. So giving people, to Ted's point about how do you close the gap, I think there are some issues around. So there are some things where we can't necessarily rely on this positive storytelling and sharing, because for some people raising an issue is something that we need to hold tight and protect confidentiality. It's difficult for us always to make a big positive noise about some of the things where people have raised issues and have sought and got resolution, because they are of a personal nature, and we need to make sure that we are continuing to protect that confidentiality whilst actually being able to really focus on closing that gap. I would just say, and I think Rosie's question was really well placed around the broader organisational development. I see this as sitting at the heart of a suite of different things that we would need to do to really think about the culture and leadership in this organisation in the context of our employees' experience all day, every day at work. I shall pause there for comments and
Thank you, Jill. really, really good presentation. Thank you very much. Who wants to? Oh, Liz.
Thank you very much. Really helpful presentation. It struck me that on these cultural issues, and I very much support what you said about that this needs to be all day, every day, it seemed to me that there were two potential issues coming out. One is a sort of behavioural one, that almost like, you know, every manager, for example, needs to really think about the way that their behaviour makes it easier or less easy for people to speak up. Do people feel that bullying is properly tackled? Those sorts of issues. So there's something about really integrating this into all the leadership programs, the training, but the day-to-day line management support of every manager. But then there's also the more systemic points about when people are raising issues, does the organisation or the directorate or the team respond by changing something, and do people understand that that's happened? And I mean, we heard earlier that there were some differences in experience between, for example, black BAME colleagues and others, between disabled and non-disabled colleagues. And in terms of that latter point of are things being done, I mean, actually we've talked offline about the importance of making sure that the things like the follow-up to the Roger Klein report that was done gets properly built into our key performance indicators, and that we are tracking what is happening in response to some of these key issues around equality and inclusion. And I know you're on the case. I am about thinking about what is an inclusive organisation and how are we going to track that over time. But I think that's really important, because some of this is about these rather different experiences of different colleagues, and we need to understand that depth and that diversity of experience and be really clear what we're doing about it, so we can say to people, we've got this far and next we're going to do you know, the next suite of activities or whatever. So yeah, that's it really. Thank you.
So Jill, before you reply, let me bring in Ian and then Ted. I suspect that some of the questions may sort of overlap a bit, so it might be easier to get a collection of questions then come back to you. Ian.
Thanks, Peter. This is not so much a question, just some observations, really, just to comment on the back of Jill's remarks. I mean, for me, I think there was some real challenges for us as an exec team and as a senior leadership group. I think some of the things we have been doing for quite some time weren't necessarily reflected in some of the answers. So things like we've been taking the exec team on the road, we've been doing lots of efforts to attend conferences and go on inspections and that sort of thing. I'm not quite sure we've necessarily got there yet in terms of people hearing and seeing those sorts of things. But again, we're reflecting on what we might do either individually and collectively to do better in that area. I think we do have a genuine challenge with 70% of our workforce being home-based, and how we get to those individuals on a personal level and understand their challenges, and we are able to communicate to them well. I think, as Jill said, I think there's a good news story here around our ability to make the case for change. I think the piece that's missing is that return and that dialogue that I think certainly came out for me. And I think we need to have that kind of two-way process. I think we've done a lot of work on new technology, digital foundations, and the QI program itself, and I think that gives me grounds for optimism in terms of the things are now in place for us to start to see action on. So it's not as if we're starting from scratch making plans now. These are things which are now in place, and I think over the coming year in particular we will start to see the impact of those things. I do think there was quite a lot in the survey for me also about the relationship between an individual and their immediate line manager, and that sort of those moment of truth conversations which are probably amplified in importance if that is taking place on the end of a video call or remotely as opposed to face-to-face, and they are relatively infrequent interaction. So I think we need to reflect on how we make our employees a bit more resilient, because I'm not sure we necessarily test for that resilience when we recruit people to work at home, which means at times they can find that the act of being at home on their own a lot actually quite challenging. Some people are quite okay with that, but some people actually just could do with some tactics and tips as to how to make that a more effective experience for them in the workplace. I think there was some pragmatic issues around pay, issues around workforce, which I think remain challenges. And one of the things that's on Jill's list is looking at a pay strategy, because I think there are still some challenges in our pay scheme. And of course, a lot of the things we're doing around the change programme are directly addressing this notion of productivity, or trying to reduce the workload of individuals. But again, for some people, they've started to have an impact. For some people, they probably haven't yet, or haven't yet to enough of an extent. So I think there's lots of stuff in progress. I think that the only thing that Jill didn't necessarily talk too much about was, I think there was also some variation. So one of the conversations we've had in the exec team is what does this mean for us locally? Because actually there's a local response here, and actually the responses might be quite different for the inspection directorates or even within regions versus what we would do for more office-based colleagues. So I think grounds for optimism, but definitely work to do. Thanks, Peter.
Great. No, thank you, Ted.
Yes, if I can make a couple of observations. I mean, this is very interesting, and I do hope we're going to repeat the Pulse survey on a regular basis, because a one-off really doesn't help us, and annual surveys I don't think work because it's too long between it. So I think regular Pulse surveys, so we can get a sense about what people are really feeling on a month-by-month basis or whatever, I think is really would be very helpful. I suppose there's a couple of things that I'd take away from this, and we've had discussions in the executive team about the clarity of the message we're putting out about change, and clearly we've been very clear about the need for change, and I think actually our staff very much support that. I'm not sure we've been clear about the change programme, because it's been changing, and we've talked about clarifying that message, and I think we've got a much clearer message now. We've got to be consistent about communicating that, so people understand, and I think that's a challenge to us all to be consistent. I suppose within my directorate, what I get from the people in the directorate is a real sense that their workload is still very heavy, and that's reflected in the very busy inspection programme. And we've been acknowledging that for a long time. I'm not sure we have really provided the solutions to it. And some of those solutions are actually how we organise the work. Some of the solutions are the processes to make it more efficient. Some of it are technological. And I think we need to start delivering some of those benefits so people can see. And I think this may relate back to the freedom to speak up issue. So I suspect a lot of them would feel that, if they raise questions about the workload, well, they've probably done that over the last 2 or 3 years, and really they haven't seen us able to turn that round. And I'm very conscious of the fact that we haven't delivered on that to the extent I would like us to have done. And I think that's going to be a challenge going forward, because people want change that's going to make a difference in the immediate future, not just change that's going to make a difference in 5 years. And we've got to get that balance right for them.
So John, and then Kirsty, and then Jill. If there's anything left to say, I'll come to you. John.
Thank you, Peter. I just wanted to gently challenge Ted. I'm not sure, and I'm talking about the strategic change in communications bit, I'm not sure that it's the message that hasn't been heard. The 77% suggest the message has been heard and understood. And I think shouting louder and more often isn't it. And the answer may be in the bottom statistic, where it says that 41% disagree they're able to contribute views to decisions that affect them, with only 34% responding positively. And Jill is quite right that QI, Andy, and that QI will address some of that. But I think there's a broader issue, as you'll know, I referred to earlier, and this suggests we need to create more opportunities for dialogue about decisions made. I would humbly suggest that it suggests the need to create more opportunities for involvement in making the decisions. And it's that, I think, which is the disconnect, and that which I think is the message I get from reading the data here. But on the positive side, I think the ET's open and considered response that we've just heard this afternoon is a huge positivity in and of itself.
Thanks, John. I'm not going to give Ted the chance to come back because we're running out of time. So Kirsty, and then as I say, final words to Jill.
Yeah, so I think when you look into the detail of the individual results at team level, there's some really interesting some variances, and there's some really very strong performances at team level where it's quite clear that we've got fantastic managers doing a brilliant job day in, day out, really doing the basics very, very well. And I think there's a real opportunity for us to use those people to share their experience so that so that colleagues can learn from one another about how to do this really, really well. And there are probably some really simple, well, I know there will be some really simple learnings that we can use to really engage people with that sort of stuff.
So Jill, anything you want to add, subtract?
So you'll, I hope, be reassured and pleased to know that there's nothing that has been shared and reflected back in sort of comments and sort of questions, and I won't go back into them, but listen, we've already spoken a lot about the data and the MI stuff, and in relation to inclusion, but I think it plays to the whole of the health of the organisation. But I think there's a sort of everything that's been mentioned is part of my will pop up and you will recognise as part of the people plan that I'm pulling together. There is something around the theme about sort of our line managers, and that's not just about behaviours. It's actually, are we clear and upfront about the expectations that we have of line managers? Do we give them enough time in terms of their jobs and how it's designed so they have capacity as well as capability and the tools, but a clear expectation of what we absolutely need them to do and what we need them to do, which is amplified because of the nature of a dispersed workforce. So that feels really important to me. I think on the point about inclusion, I could go on a long time about inclusion, and we will be having that conversation in November, hopefully. But the point about, so to Ted's point about workload and are people not telling us anymore because they're sick of telling us, it will be very interesting, and were I a betting woman, I would probably put some money on it, that when we get the results of the people survey in at the back end of this year, early next year, that there will probably be some correlation between, because I've seen it and experienced it in other places, between the questions around people feeling valued for the work they do, the question relating to I have an acceptable workload, and the question relating to pay and benefits. And so when the first two are out of kilter, that pops up as a pay issue. And therefore I think the trailing of the piece of work that I've started around pay is actually wider than pay. It's about reward and recognition. So we need to think properly about how we reward people in this organisation and how we recognise their contribution and achievement. And I think that will help us to pick up a number of themes that have been sort of just sit beneath some of this data. And final point from me is I think the really important thing around sort of data like this is that it is data. It provides us with insight, which allows us to target our actions.
Jill, brilliant. Thank you very much, Jill. I think we're going to see you quite regularly at the board, so thank you very much for today. Robert's anxiously looking for Imelda. She came and then she went, I'm afraid, Robert, so you're on your own. Health Watch.
Rewarding to be here. So I'll steal some of her thunder. You obviously have the report, and I was going to make 2 points before handing over to Imelda, and perhaps she'll be here by the time I've made them. And the things I was going to highlight was the Health Watch conference of the Reports Library. We have an annual conference, which is sort of the highlight of the Health Watch year, of course. But the extraordinary thing about it was it's the first time I've been to the whole of the conference. Of the 152 local health watches, it was attended by over 130 of them. And the impact of that is that you have in one room, in this case in Birmingham, a representative of virtually every local authority community in the country, all come with views about how their local health and social care system could be better. And this isn't a political movement, this is a movement of people who are really genuinely interested and involved in making their communities' health better. So it's an extraordinarily powerful tool, and is increasingly recognised as such. And one of the big things at the conference was that we launched our report on patient transport, which was, through some useful management, immediately accepted by Simon Stevens at the conference with an undertaking to review the way in which patient transport is supplied in the NHS. And it's these sort of common and generic issues which tend to get forgotten in the cracks of planning for integration and so on are what I think Health Watch is extremely good at bringing to light and getting, we hope, something done about it. And the other, very briefly, is the reports library. We have put together, we, Health Watch England, have put together on our website a means of getting access to every single local Health Watch report, certainly in the last few years, and eventually they will go back, I think, to 2010. And you can search them. So if you want to find out what local Health Watch may have done on any particular subject, whether it be obesity, diabetes, or something, you can just find it. Quite often people come to us and say, what does Health Watch say about so-and-so? This will actually mean they can actually find out for themselves, which will be helpful. But there is the beginning of I hope, ensuring that we have more impact, even more impact than we have at the moment. But I just thought I'd just mention those two things about what is in effect our national coverage in a way which I think makes patient and public involvement a very real thing. And I think that's increasingly recognised. But Imelda is now here, so I can hand over to her.
Thank you. I'll just a couple of other issues just to highlight. As you know, we've been doing some significant amount of work with NHS England on getting the engaging with the public on the long-term plan and the development of the local plans. The piece of work is now complete on our side. We had over 30,000 people respond to the survey, over 500 events took place, over 1,000 other events were attended right across the country, and we've gathered real depth of information. And the 44 reports that match each of the SDP areas are now published on our website. We're working with NHS England now to see what comes out of the reports that are published from the provider side, from the STP side, and to see the level of take-up that we've had of our recommendations into that planning process. But it's an incredibly good piece of work that the whole network engaged in, and I think they were very proud of at conference. The main issues that are emerging from all that work, we're still analysing a lot of the data. Not surprisingly, there's issues around access to primary care. The public are very concerned about that. Transport, that Robert's already mentioned. The public, by and large, are more ready to embrace technology in a way that I think that we're more reticent to think that they will. Some basic stuff that won't surprise anybody here, but about communication, keeping communication simple, straightforward, understandable, that would go a long way to help people manage their own conditions. Prevention high, and also issues around mental health. None of that would surprise anybody here, but across that scale of the population, I think it's really interesting. So we're taking all that forward. Just a note here about we've been engaging in the clinical standards review. That's particularly looking at the 4-hour wait in accident and emergency, and 6 local health watch are doing work with the public on their experience. The views that came back from the public were there's no point in having a 4-hour waiting time if you're having a really bad 4-hour waiting time. You'd rather wait 4 hours and 10 minutes and have a good experience, at least know where you are in the queue or be communicated with. So 6 are working with NHS England on those clinical reviews, and we'll know the outcomes of those quite soon. Mental health continues to be a main priority for us. First, I will apologise for you getting these as appendices. They were supposed to be live links in your report, so sorry if you had to scroll through a trillion pages. But we recently published our first report on mental health in this series, and that's particularly around maternal mental health, and Liz led on this piece of work for us. It's been well received, and we're now moving on to our work on children and young people and mental health. patient transport, you know, that was a very nice quick turnaround. We've been saying this is important, but actually when we got the evidence back from the NHS long-term plan work, NHS England also said, you're quite right, then this should be one of our priorities too. And the last part of my report here just highlights for you the work that we're doing all the time to improve and support the network. So we have a quality framework in place. We have a Making a Difference toolkit in place. We're giving a lot of campaign and communication support to them. This conference was my third conference, and I thought the atmosphere was really great, that feeling of belonging to one organisation rather than there being 153 in the room. So it felt very good. So you have attached our maternal mental health report. Our last quarter, what does our insight tell us? What are the public telling us? Oh, it's there and back, transport report. They all look the same to me, don't they? Don't tell our comms team I said that. And this report tells you about what are the public talking to us about over the last quarter, with particular in-depth work on personalisation and work in prisons. So that's a quick trot through what we're doing.
Thank you, Imelda. Your timing was perfect. It was a very wet weekend, and having all this reading was marvellous. So thank you, and it was incredibly interesting. So it was good. Questions or comments, Chris?
Just to reiterate something I said earlier on when you were out the room, Imelda, the conversation that we had with your team around the messages around state of care and the library that you've developed, we think are excellent resources, right. And they'll be very important to us in terms of how we share and work on our independent voice. So the information we've talked about how we can make sure our intelligence teams are absolutely aligned when we come to using and understanding that information and how it works as a two-way process. So just to commend you on the fact that's happened and to reiterate to colleagues and to you our commitment to make sure we use that as part of independent voice.
You're very welcome to do the Mutual Appreciation Society. Well done on the report yesterday and all the coverage. I thought it was really excellent, really interesting.
Good. Anybody want to raise anything else? Mark?
Thanks, Chairman. Imelda, just a couple of observations, if I may, about your two very, very good reports, the mental health and Journey to Parenthood. And I thought it was really interesting when talking about the journey, mums were asked, what would you have done differently? And the answer came back, I would have sought advice earlier. And this linked into fear and stigma. And I just wonder whether, I just thought that's a really interesting finding, and I just wonder whether we then communicate with nursing, midwifery and medical training organisations that fear and stigma has not gone away, and how they manage that, and also whether there isn't an opportunity for us to put it into our well-led framework, how fear and stigma is being managed going forward. That's my first question or observation. And the second one, I think the transport piece. Can I just say that when I was reading those vignettes, those little stories, it was just so difficult to read, just what people were going through to get to a centre of care and to get back. So I just thought that was so powerful, and I'm very pleased that it's had that response from NHSE.
We will take forward the issue around communication stigma. That's one of our sort of priorities, messaging from the report. And I think the transport one is really interesting because when I raised it as the early finding at a meeting at NHS England, out of all the work that we've done around the country, the response was, this is not individuals, this was the room, sort of went, transport's always a problem. And I had to say, I know it's always a problem. I know it's always a problem, but what we're talking about is very poorly people getting 3 buses. So let's sort it. So it's quite interesting because it's been bubbling for a very long time. But I think the stories bring it, the impact on people's lives bring it alive. Thank you.
Well, can I congratulate you on the transport document? You are entirely right. It's one of these long-standing issues that no one has ever really addressed properly. And I have to say, I'm not sure we've addressed it as well as we could have done in our reports. But actually talking to patients is often the top of their concerns, and it has a huge effect on the quality of their experience of care. If they have to travel for hours and hours to go to an appointment or treatment or whatever. So I think congratulations on that. And I'm glad to hear that action is being taken on it. That's really good news.
Paul.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you, Imola. I was just going to take a bit out of my next report, which is on on ACGC, because we did have a session on Health Watch England there on risk and assurance around that. And the point I was going to make is, and John may be able to outline this, I thought this was the best session we'd had with HWE for the entire time that I've been in the chair there. It showed me that there really was a better grasp of risk within HWE than we've seen previously, and of the issues involved and the way it is. And if that's a particular lens at looking HWE at the moment over time and its improvement, I would suggest, certainly as far as I can see, the improvement has been significant.
Did you want to add to that, John?
I entirely agree with the chairman.
Perfect. Does anybody want to...
Could I just, in that regard, to pay tribute to the chair of our own audit risk committee, Danielle Hume, who's been an absolute star in developing, I would say, the risk strategy and approach to risk of Health Watch England.
So why don't I pay tribute to the chairman of Health Watch England and to Imelda. Thank you very seriously. I thought the report was good. The energy, the initiative, the scope of the work, the impact of the work, it all came through. And so to both of you and to the team, thank you very much indeed. Great. Good. So, Paul, you dipped into your ACGC report, but...
I don't have a lot to say.
Good.
It was a working meeting between... we dealt with the annual report last time round, some good stuff coming through from internal audit, some useful discussions about how internal audit are involved in the transformation programme and the work going on there, and a good look at risks in a number of different areas, and particularly around transformation as a programme as opposed to the individual risks, and around the finance function. And that's all I'd like to say.
Great. Does anybody want to ask anything? Perfect. That moves us on to any other business. Is there any other business from the board? Good. So that's the end of the formal board meeting. That does leave us time for questions from the public. Robin, I know you've sent a question in advance, so if you'd like to go to the microphone, we'd like to know what the question is.
Thank you, Chairman. Robin Pike, Hertfordshire Health Watch, a patient representative. My question is about the liaison between CQC and other government inspectorates, such as Ofsted and the Health and Safety Executive. I seem to remember that in the early days of CQC, there were very regular meetings with Ofsted, for example, and as other government inspectorates are gathering feedback and data, I wonder to what extent there is ongoing liaison and discussion.
Thanks, Robin. And at the risk of sounding very sort of picky, you keep saying other inspectorates. We are not an inspectorate. And that's a really important point. Inspection is part of what we do, but it's not by any means the only thing that we do. And that is fundamentally different from some other organisations which are inspectorates. the short answer to your question is there's a lot of both formal and informal liaison with inspectorates and other bodies, both in and out of health, both in the England and the UK and outside. Specifically, Chris, do you want to add anything in terms of our MOUs or anything else? Microphone?
No, I thought I'd put that on and send it off. Thanks for the question, Robin. There is both, as Peter says, both strategic and operational relationships with not just those inspectorates, but there's a range of organisations that we work with across health and care to exactly, you say, gather information and share information with them. An example of that work would be, I guess, the work with Ofsted we do on delivering joint inspection programme on children's services, which I think the organisations that are both inspected and the wider groups find invaluable. We also have very close relationships with the Health and Safety Executive, and that sharing of information and also sharing of insight about how to drive change has been something that we've been having a good and close conversation with them. They are all of the formal joint working arrangements, both with Ofsted, HSE and other organisations, are on the website, and there's a nominated senior lead from CQC for those. So they're all there. But if there's anything else around those relationships or anything in particular you want to know, I'm happy to have a conversation with you after this.
Thank you very much indeed, Robin. Thank you, board. And that is that for the time being. Thank you.